Hello and welcome to TheAIbumMan. Today we're going to be reviewing Hollow Bones by Rival Sons. And yes, sure, this album came out a while ago, but I don't care. I really want to talk about it and tell you why you should listen to it if you haven't already, or just generally start a discussion about it, because, spoiler alert, it's a pretty damn good album. So Rival Sons, if you don't know who they are, if you've been living under a rock in rock music, that was a terrible pun. They hail from Long Beach, California. Now, I've been saying for quite a long time that they really are the pinnacle of a now rather bloated scene, let's say, of 70s rock revivalists. Every 10 seconds there seems to be another band claiming to channel Deep Purple or Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath and be authentic and true to the 70s. But few really live up to the insurmountable reputation of their influences. But Rival Sons, I think, is one of those bands that really goes above. I'm not saying they're as good as Black Sabbath, Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, but they're a damn sight closer than most bands, let me tell you. And their 2014 album, Great Western Valkyrie, the one just before this, was my second favourite album of 2014, only losing out to Solstafier's Magnificent Otter. It was a near-perfect record, and in my opinion, a genuine watershed moment in their career. We found a maturer, bolder, more confident sounding bands. They just seemed surer in their songwriting skills, their style, their sound. They were no longer just Zeppelin wannabes, but became their own entity. They became Rival Sons, owing a great deal to the past, but firmly representing the future of classic rock. And live, I've seen them 3 times now, I think. They are a tornado-like force, tearing through live performances with unbridled passion and ferocity. Vocalist Jay Buchanan, as he roams around the stage like a crazed animal that's just been let off its leash or something, howling out the lyrics, which is contrasted by the cool, sultry guitarist Scott Holliday with his fuzz-infused lead work. But enough of that past. I mean, we need to look at how Hollow Bones stacks up in their discography and in the 70s rock revival scene. In many ways, this album feels like a logical continuation of the sound perfected on the Great Western Valkyrie. It shares that same looser production style, Dave Cobb producing again, the rhythm-oriented songwriting in that, similar vein as Zeppelin, sadly. But they try first and foremost, which is what I really like about their sound, to capture that live jam feel. And it just feels so much more natural and far less rigid than even if I like Pressure in Time. Pressure in Time is a good album, it has some pretty catchy songs, but it definitely has more of a rigidity to it. It has more of a standard song structure, standard production. It's a relatively straightforward record, even with its well-executed singles, but certainly with Heads Down onwards, we started to, in particular with Great Western Valkyrie, we had longer, more varied compositions, and I feel we find that again on Hollow Bones. But still, I mean, as everyone who's been following the band since Pressure in Time, or hell before that, everyone knows that Rival Sons can write one hell of a catchy 3-minute rock song. And certainly part 1 of the title track, I guess, Hollow Bones Part 1, is no exception to that tradition. The blues groove running deep on this, like a needle trailing a record, with pulsating guitars and some of the tightest drum and bass grooves you're really going to hear all year. Vocals soar and scream, and this is what Rival Sons now do. This is their bread and butter, and they do it damn well. And you get in a similar vein, kind of thundering voices, which I feel has more of a Black Keys-y type bass line, and yet again, really, it's actually Mike Miley's drums that really make these songs. The guy's shown himself to be a very consistent drummer in the past, but on this album, he just seems to be on fire. And on this and Hollow Bones Part 1, we also have Scott Holliday certainly playing some rather atypical rock solos that focus far more on texture and effect than they do on melody, or in that sort of Joe Perry vein, or shredding in like an Yngwie type style. And this provides, I feel, a really nice change of pace for the standard rock solo, which, sure, I know and love and have heard a million times before, but it's nice to sometimes get away from that, hear something a bit different, a bit more nuanced, and I feel that Scott Holliday brings that extra level of sort of dynamism to the album in that regard, and certainly to these songs. But in other ways, these aren't the highlights guitar-wise, since that title, without question, belongs to Fade Out, one of the standout tracks from the record. Certainly it takes a more measured, calmer approach, clean chords ring out drenched in reverb as Jay's vocals are pushed to the front, but this song is one that builds gently, sort of ebbing and flowing between quieter and louder sections, changing between that distorted riff, which is almost at times reminiscent, I feel, of the Beatles' I Want You She's So Heavy, and that sort of repetitive manner as it goes on and on, sort of droning along, but also interplaying with the clean delicacy of the quieter section. It's the ends, though, that makes this song, as over the pulsating, constant riff we have Scott's lead guitar, high-pitched squeals dispersed with slide guitar. It's emotive, effective, and rather distinct. I certainly feel that on this one more than others, even more than Great Western Valkyrie, Scott is carving a very distinct and very recognisable sound, which is definitely for the best of this band. It's what the bands need, because Jay's vocals are pretty distinct. Clearly the bass and drums, as I said before, really proven himself, and Scott, always been a really good guitarist. I think it's here he plays some of his most interesting stuff, though. And do you remember how on Heads Down, their second major label record, they had Manifest Destiny Part 1 and 2? Well, they've done something similar here, with, again, funnily enough, the second one, in my opinion, being the superior one. The centrepiece of the album is the near 7-minute Hollow Bones Part 2, and continuing from some of the refrains that we saw in the first, certainly continues some of the general musical themes we've seen, but this expands upon it, imbued with this sort of a sense of spirituality which I didn't quite expect, as Jay chants Hare Krishna, reminiscent of George Harrison on the All Things Must Pass album. But the power and conviction in his voice is what makes this is one of the best vocal performances I've ever heard from him, which is certainly saying something. Well, Fade Out belongs to Scott Holiday, and Hollow Bones Part 1 belongs to Mike. Part 2 is owned by Jay Buchanan on the vocals. Though the haunting aspect of the atmosphere created instrumentally should certainly not be underplayed, especially over the kind of the halfway point when the bass really begins to resonate and the song just kicks into overdrive. Very powerful song, wonderfully delivered. It shows them at the top of their game. One of the more intriguing songs on this album was a cover. We haven't really seen many covers from Rival Sons, certainly not on their studio albums, but here we find Black Coffee, a tribute to Steve Marriott and Humble Pie. This was certainly a song that I feel takes a left turn and is different to anything else the band has really ever done. I mean, originally this was an Icon Tina Turner song, I believe, but this version clearly derives far more inspiration from the Humble Pie version. Marriott made quite a few changes lyrically to it. It's a song that's really about the influence of black artists on the blues, and sort of the feeling from certainly a white person's perspective that, well, it can be difficult to relate to the themes sung and the social condition from which the music arises. The heart of it is just something so fundamentally universal about what they're singing about. There's a great lyric in this song, "My skin is white but my soul is black," and certainly you see a lot of the influence from those 50s, certainly blues artists in this song and in Rival Sons' version, but they give it certainly more of a modern feel, with a gospel choir as well, which is kind of unexpected, and backing the band. It's really the live feeling of the rhythm section that drives the song. Rhythm and blues was all about rhythm, and well, Jay's soulful voice is perfectly suited to the blues. I'd certainly be interested to hear them expand on, well, go in this more bluesy direction on other albums. It could make it certainly something interesting. So yes, I've clearly been very, very positive towards this album, so do I have anything negative to say, or I'm just going to give this a 10? No, I do have a couple of things negatives. I'm sorry, I know, bit of a downer, but it's not a perfect album. One of the tracks I have to talk about is the end track, because I really does nothing for me. It's called All That I Want, and it's odd in the fact that it doesn't sound at all odd. Let me explain. It's just this kind of cliche love ballads, and it's number 4,098 of ones that I've had. There's so many of these. It's like, the classic, let's close the album with some pretty ballad or something. It's dull. Sure, Jay's voice is good, and the acoustic guitar melody is nice, and it's heartfelt, but an album full of fresh sounding material that puts a new spin on classic rock, this feels oddly derivative. Where are the Hendrix-like guitar effects instead of being replaced by violins? It's just utterly dull. I enjoy a good rock ballad, but I find this deeply underwhelming and such a downer at the end of the album. And, well, there's been many songs I've certainly lavished with praise. That doesn't mean that every track kills it in the same way. Baby Boy doesn't really stray too far from the Rival Sons formula with a whoa chorus. It's, by the numbers, enjoyable for sure, but lacking the fiery power of other tracks. Maybe the same could be said for Tied Up. To less of an extent. I wasn't too impressed when I saw that song live at Download Festival, though. Still, I love this album. This is unquestionably a highlight of 2016. Do not get me wrong. Rival Sons have done it again. Is it Great Western Valkyrie? Not in my view. I think that's going to be something that's very difficult to top. But this, it's an 8.5 out of 10. It's essential listing for 2016 and one of the best rock albums you're going to hear. This has been TheAIbumMan. Thanks for watching, comment, subscribe, and as usual, long live rock and roll.